And just like that, the longest shutdown in U.S. history is over. 43 days and finito. It's all done. Donald Trump signing the bill to end this shutdown. Mike Davis, the Viceroy, my colleague at the Article 3 Project, he will join us to break down the shutdown, what's happening at the Supreme Court, the judicial insurrection that's been raging for this entire first year, and much more. All of that and much more as well on today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. It's over. It's over. It's done. Frankly, you probably don't even know, I'm not even sure if I know why it happened in the first place. So by a 222 to 209 vote in the United States House of Representatives, the bill to end the shutdown passed last night. There were 2 Republicans who defected and 6 Democrats from Hakeem Jeffries' caucus who crossed the aisle, similar to their 8 colleagues in the Senate, to vote to end this thing once and for all. Donald Trump signing the bill in the late hours of the evening last night on the East Coast to end this shutdown once and for all. Here is Donald Trump talking about how Democrats tried to extort the American people with the shutdown, and they failed.
Shut down the government of the United States in an attempt to extort American taxpayers for hundreds of billions of dollars for illegal aliens and people that came into our country illegally. From gangs, from prisons, from mental institutions. They wanted to pay them $1.5 trillion, which would have really hurt our healthcare businesses and our recipients at levels never seen before. Today, we're sending a clear message that we will never give in to extortion, because that's what it was. They tried to extort. The Democrats tried to extort our country. In just a moment, I'll sign a bill exactly like we asked Democrats to send us all along, many days ago. This cost the country $1.5 trillion, this little excursion that they took us on.
I read a weekly newsletter for Newsweek called the Josh Hammer Report, which you should go ahead and subscribe to if you can. And it comes out on Wednesday. So yesterday in the newsletter, I actually said the exact same thing. I said that this was extortion, all along. Those of you who are film buffs and you remember The Godfather, and I'm a huge mega fan of The Godfather 1 and Part 2, for what it is worth, think back to Luca Brasi and the opening scenes of The Godfather talking to Vito Corleone, the notion of make him an offer they can't refuse. That's what Democrats tried to do. Here's the difference. Republicans refused it. They literally refused it, and Democrats eventually said, okay, you know what, you're right. They didn't get a single thing. They literally got nothing. Nothing. They got nothing that they were ostensibly fighting for. John Thune in the Senate vaguely promised to hold a vote sometime next month in December on the expiring Obamacare healthcare subsidies that are purportedly the reason the shutdown happened in the first place. Mike Johnson, the House Westworth, has not even promised that. So not only have the Democrats not gotten a guarantee about the Obamacare subsidies, they haven't even gotten a guarantee on a vote. So their tails are between their legs. They are going home. The Civil War is raging on the left. Look, what happened here, and the American people are going to see through this. It's just a question as to how that plays out. We'll get into that and more with Mike Davis momentarily. But this is cynicism on cynicism on cynicism. It is literally multiple layers of cynicism. So the whole Obamacare strategy was cynical in the first place, insofar as the expiring subsidies were always going to have a bigger effect, and if they're not renewed, will have a bigger effect on denizens of blue states, aka those states where the feds have taken over the healthcare marketplace, a much bigger premium hike on blue state denizens than red state denizens. So it was self-serving, even taking it at face value. But it was doubly cynical even on top of that. On the one hand, Chuck Schumer, who was one of the masterminds, if you can really be the mastermind of such an utterly idiotic, self-owning, weird scheme, but Chuck Schumer tried to do this for a very simple reason. It's not that he cares about your health care. It's not that he cares really about anything other than his own job security. Dude's been on the federal government and the state government payroll for 50 years. Literally, he was first elected to a public elected position in the New York State legislature back in 1975. He has been in elected office, mooching off of the state and federal taxpayer for a decade and a half longer than I've even been born. It's nuts. But he cares about the fact that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is probably going to try to primary him in 2028 because Schumer's fallen out of step with the Democratic Party. He's actually the least popular Senate Democratic leader in the Senate Democratic caucus history. So he's trying to forestall this primary challenge, and this was his way of doing it. Was trying to show that he fights. The problem, dude, is that you caved. You didn't get anything. And now the left actually hates him more than they ever hate him. That's the second level of cynicism. The third level of cynicism of this shutdown fight, as Senator Tim Kaine admitted on a clip that we played on the show earlier this week, is that this was all about the election. To the extent that it was about anything other than Chuck Schumer's own primary prospects to ward off AOC, to the extent that it was about anything other than that, it was about the election. And they're letting the cat out of the bag, Tim Kaine and others, when they say it as such. They're saying that they were doing this to try to gin up voter turnout in New York City, in New Jersey, Virginia, and places like that there. So what a load of crap. What an utter load of crap to put the American people through this for absolutely nothing. For nothing. It's just such a total waste of time. Again, I'm just happy that this is over before Thanksgiving so that everyone who needs to fly can fly. We are flying to a wedding up in the New York, New Jersey area. I care about that. I'm sure you care about flying to wherever you're flying to. That's a good thing, but there is very, very, very little else good about this whole saga, and that's going to redound against Democrats. I have full confidence in that. Well, the longtime listeners and viewers of the Josh Hammer Show know that the law, all things legal and judicial related, that is one of our bread and butter topics here on the Josh Hammer Show. And really, there's no one better to talk about it with than my good friend and colleague at the Article 3 Project. He is the president and founder of the Article 3 Project, perhaps most commonly known these days inside the Beltway simply as the Viceroy. When you have a one-name nickname, you know that it speaks for itself. He's not Shaq or he's not something like that, but he's just the Viceroy. And that, of course, is Mike Davis. So we're thrilled now to bring on my friend and colleague at the Article 3 Project, Mike Davis, back to the Josh Hammer Show. First time in video as our guest. Mike, my good friend, thank you for rejoining us.
Well, thank you, Josh. As everyone knows, I have a face for radio, so this will be an interesting interview.
Well, it's hardly your first rodeo, so I'm sure that you will be totally just fine. So, Mike, there's a lot to cover. As always, the news cycle is just utterly packed. Let's begin with the formal end of the shutdown. So the shutdown finally ends last night. 43 days, the longest shutdown in United States history. Donald Trump signing the bill to end this thing once and for all around 11 p.m. to midnight, somewhere in that time range, give or take, on the East Coast last night. I think a lot of folks, Mike, and frankly, to an extent, including me, and I do this for a living, I think a lot of folks are saying, what was that about? Like literally, what the heck just happened? Like why were thousands of flights just canceled? Why did people go without paychecks? Why did people lose their SNAP payments? Why did we put the armed forces in jeopardy of not getting paychecks? What the heck just happened? I mean, break it down for us.
Well, it's very clear that President Trump and his team, along with congressional Republicans, delivered a massive victory for the American people. And this is monumental because Republicans in the past have been so scared and so cowed and so burned by these Democrat-led government shutdowns. And so the Democrats were playing by the pre-Trump playbook, where if you shut down the government and try to show sympathetic victims out there, then the Democrats can extort more money in these budgets. And in this case, the Democrats are trying to extort more money for health care for their illegal aliens. And President Trump, to his great credit, and it's why the Democrats hate him so much and the establishment Republicans hate him so much, is President Trump tore up that old playbook and he used the Trump playbook. And the Trump playbook was laser-like messaging. And I want to give President Trump's team great credit for this, including the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, James Blair, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, James Braid, the Ledge Director, Russ Vought, OMB Director, Mark Paoletta, the General Counsel of OMB. They fought hard and they won. This is what when I talk about bold and fearless judges, this is what I mean throughout the Trump administration. These are bold and fearless leaders led by President Trump. President Trump had never run for office the first time. He had never been in office. He accomplished a lot. He made mistakes. He's not making those mistakes after 4 years in the wilderness when he's back in the White House.
Yeah, and the whole thing, just on the political optics of it, seems like a massive, massive self-own. And for the American people paying even a modicum of attention, I think they see through this total charade. They see that this is cynicism on cynicism on cynicism. So first of all, shutting down ostensibly, allegedly, over expiring Obamacare subsidies is cynicism insofar as the expiring subsidies were really mostly going to harm blue states. It was mostly the states that had the feds taking over the private healthcare marketplace there. Conservatives or red states, frankly, would not have been harmed. So it was self-serving and cynical like that. Chuck Schumer, as an individual, deeply cynical, because what he was trying to do was trying to forestall an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez primary challenge in New York State in 2028. Man, did that backfire. The left is literally angrier at him than ever before for capitulating with precisely zero gains to show for it. And the final reason that it's cynical is that you had Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia say the quiet part out loud a few days ago, which is that they did all this and did it for this long just to try to drive out voters in New York City, Virginia, and New Jersey at the elections last week. So it's just, it's grossly cynical. I mean, I think if you're deeply skeptical and cynical about politics, you're probably not skeptical and cynical enough. So I guess my question to you, Mike, is do you think that Republicans can ride this momentum, and what does that look like? Can they ride this momentum with this intra-left civil war? Is that going to translate into a renewed legislative push for Republicans on Capitol Hill? Is it going to be translated into potential political gains in the midterms next fall? How do you see all that playing out?
Republicans in the past have tended to be the biggest cowards on the planet. And the idea that they were going to be accused of cutting off food stamps for poor people, particularly black people, would have terrified them in the past. We showed that you can change the playbook here with President Trump and show that no, it was not Republicans who were trying to cut off food stamps for poor people, particularly the poor black people. It was the Democrats who were willing to do that for 43 days so they can provide illegal healthcare to illegal aliens. And so I think about that. If you have the Democrats' key constituencies, African Americans and illegal immigrants, fighting each other, that's not a good thing for the Democrats Party. And I would say to Republicans, you saw with this shutdown that you can follow President Trump's lead, his bold and fearless leadership, and you can not only win significant policy wins for the American people, this is good for you politically.
And the politics, to me, based on the very early tea leaves, do seem to favor Republicans. I'm not so sure that Republicans, quote unquote, won this battle, but Democrats definitely lost it. And by definition, when one side just totally loses it in America's two-party system, the other side is kind of by default the winner. And like you, I anticipate that there will be some political wind at their sails to benefit from that. So Mike Davis, folks, is my friend and colleague at the Article 3 Project. Check out our work at article3project.org. Follow Mike on X at MRDDMIA. Mike, I want to get into some judicial stuff. We at Article 3 Project are deeply involved in the judicial nominations process. This was one of President Trump's signature achievements of his first term, was a fundamental remaking of the federal judiciary. Why don't you just update the listeners and viewers who don't pay as close attention as to what has already been done on this front when it comes to the lower courts thus far in the first year of this term, and what we might reasonably anticipate to be in the pipeline for this next year, give or take, ahead.
President Trump's biggest and most consequential accomplishment of his first term was the transformation of the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court to the first constitutionalist majority in 90 years. And while some of these judges, some of these justices may disappoint us from time to time, we are seeing monumental wins by President Trump at the Supreme Court, particularly on the emergency docket, where President Trump and his White House counsel, David Warrington, Susie Wiles, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Solicitor General John Sauer, and many others, they are getting huge wins when these lower court judges, these Democrat activist judges appointed by Obama and Biden, are trying to sabotage not only President Trump and not only the presidency, but the will of the American voters. And so you're seeing those monumental wins. And I think President Trump and Bondi and Sauer have like 25 wins or something, just an unbelievable number in his first year at the Supreme Court. It's like 25 out of 27. It's a very high number. And you're going to see more of those wins. And that's not these are not just wins for President Trump. These are reshaping the court's interactions with the executive branch, which is so important. You're showing that the president is elected with all executive power, and the American people are going to make that decision. That's why the elections are so consequential. What you're going to see in President Trump's second term, where you have President Trump and his team, again, Susie Wiles, Pam Bondi, David Warrington, Steve Kenney, the Deputy Counsel for Nominations, many others. They're working with the Article 3 projects and others to put up even more bold and fearless judges in President Trump's second term. We're going to build on President Trump's success in his first term and pick even more bold and fearless judges. My goal at the Article 3 project that I very publicly said is that the political branches are not going to drain the swamp. Why would the reptiles drain the swamp? And so what we need to do is appoint federal judges who understand the proper role of the federal governments and the separation of powers, but both vertically and horizontally across the federal government, vertically as it relates to the states, tribes, and we the people. And we need to start having these judges dismantle the federal government, particularly the executive branch. And that is our goal at the Article 3 project over the next couple decades. I'm hoping that President Trump is going to speed this along pretty significantly with his monumental wins at the Supreme Court.
Well, it's an extraordinarily important goal, and it's a goal, speaking of the lower courts, that I saw play out a little bit firsthand during my year clerking on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. I clerked in 2018 during the first Trump term. I literally saw the Fifth Circuit, which is one of the more right-of-center federal appeals courts. I literally saw it be transformed and go even further to the right during my year clerking on the court, where we saw the confirmation of judges like my own former boss, Judge Ho, Judge Oldham. And to your point, those two judges are great examples. Judges Ho and Oldham have written some amazing opinions attacking the deep state, attacking things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as being structured in an unconstitutional fashion there. And that kind of leads me to my next question for you, Mike, which is looking at the current Supreme Court docket. The justices have expedited oral arguments coming up soon. I forgot the exact date, but it's coming up soon, an argument as to the constitutionality of some of these so-called independent agencies. This has been one of the big legal battles recurring throughout this first year of the second Trump term. There's this thorny 1930s era precedent called Humphrey's Executor that attempts to say that these so-called independent agencies are constitutional. They're not. It's not. Yeah, I mean, you're either in Article 2 or you're not there. So that's one case that I am very much looking forward to this term. I'm curious what other cases have attracted your attention, or if you agree kind of that this Article 2 structural separation of power stuff is really what we should be most focused on this Supreme Court term.
Article 2 is by far the most important issue in this Supreme Court term, as you said, Josh. And Humphrey's Executor is probably the most important case because remember, we have three branches of government under our Constitution and only three branches. Article 1 gives all legislative power to Congress. Article 2 gives all executive power to the president. And Article 3 gives all judicial power to the Supreme Court and any lower courts that Congress creates. And this idea that there's this fourth branch of government, that there are these independent agencies that are experts, that are unaccountable to the duly elected president of the United States and to the American people is, I think, would be totally foreign to our founders. And I think that we have a constitutionalist majority on the Supreme Court now that is going to start dismantling these so-called independent agencies. If the president cannot fire the head of a government agency for any reason or no reason, it's not constitutional.
Yeah, and that would be a tremendous ruling. That would be a tremendous ruling for the separation of powers. It would be a tremendous ruling for what the executive power means in Article 2. That's really what we're talking about here. If the executive power of Article 2 does not entail the ability to make all personnel decisions, to make all hiring and firing decisions within Article 2, then what does it mean to be the executive? I mean, what does it mean to be the CEO of a corporation if you can't fire the secretary who's taking a 3-hour lunch break? I mean, that's kind of like one way to possibly think about it there. I mean, either you call the shots, either you're the big dog, or you're not there. So I'm certainly hoping for a clean ruling. For what it's worth, I would presume you agree. I'm actually pretty cautiously optimistic about that case, actually. That's very much the kind of case where I think that this court has very much the right the right instincts overall. So again, folks, we're chatting with Mike Davis, otherwise known as the Viceroy. He's the president and founder of the Article 3 Project. Check out our work at article3project.org. I am senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. You can follow Mike on X at MRDDMIA as well. Mike, talk to us a little bit about the current state of Lawfare. So at Article 3 Project, when I joined forces with you about a year and a half ago, this was kind of in the midst of the Democrat Lawfare complex, and this was kind of in the midst of all the Joe Biden, Merrick Garland prosecutions, and that was a huge focus of ours at the time. And we seem to have essentially won on that issue, right? I mean, Jack Smith looks like one of the biggest idiots in the world, so-called special counsel Jack Smith. The Fani Willis case in Georgia has finally collapsed. Tish James in New York State. This is the alleged corporate fraud case, the quote unquote civil case against the Trump organization that has now collapsed. So we've essentially won when it comes to lawfare. You like to point to a federal statute, I believe it's 18 U.S. Code Section 241, if I have the citation correctly, which is a federal conspiracy against rights. This is one of the statutes that you talk about it as possibly saying that these leading members of the Democrat lawfare complex, Jack Smith's a good example, frankly, Fani Willis, all these folks, Alvin Bragg. Talk to us a little more about what that would mean in practice when it comes to the Trump administration's response to the horrific lawfare. I'd also be curious for your thoughts on some of the prosecutions that the left might say, that looks a little more political. You know, I'm talking here about Tish James or John Bolton or Jim Comey there. How do you kind of weave those things together?
So what Democrats have done to President Trump, his top aides, his allies and supporters for the last 8 years is a criminal conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. When you politicize and weaponize intel agencies and law enforcement to take out your political opponents, to try to bankrupt them, to try to throw them in prison, to try to get them fired, to try to get them disbarred, when you weaponize the government against your political enemies for non-crimes, that is the textbook definition of a conspiracy against constitutional rights. And the Democrats now say that, oh, you can't use that statute. That is a statute from after the Civil War that Congress enacted to take out the Klan. And my response to that is oh, really? That was one of the 4 charges that Jack Smith brought against President Trump for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887 and the First Amendment. So these Democrats who suddenly want to be textualist and originalist on conspiracy against rights are not going to be able to do that. And so I would have very publicly called for a grand jury in Fort Pierce, Florida. And I've done this for the last 3+ years since the unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful home raid at Mar-a-Lago against President Trump for presidential records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. I've called for this special grand jury in Fort Pierce. I've also publicly pushed for my friend Jason Redding Quinones to get picked by President Trump and confirmed as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. That has happened. Jason has motioned the Southern District of Florida to open up a new grand jury in both Fort Pierce and Fort Lauderdale. Those grand juries will be impaneled in January. And I have very publicly called for Jason and the Justice Department to use that Fort Pierce grand jury to investigate this ongoing criminal conspiracy by these lawfare Democrats, going back 8 years to Crossfire Hurricane, the Russian collusion hoax, and continuing this day to politicize and weaponize intel and law enforcement to take out political enemies. Justice is definitely coming. I'm going to push very hard for that very publicly. So these lawfare Democrats better lawyer up because nobody's above the law.
I genuinely hope you're right. I really do. And again, folks, Mike Davis can be followed on X at MRDDMIA. Check out our work at the Article 3 Project, article3project.org. I genuinely hope you're right because it's one of my theories, Mike, that one of the reasons why a lot of Americans are going to, shall I say, conspiratorial places with increasing frequency is that there's been no accountability for genuine, actual scandals for a very, very long time now. And I think Russiagate is actually the first instance of that. It's one of the reasons that I was personally really happy to see Tulsi Gabbard and others start talking about this again over this past summer. So whether it's that, whether or not it's the whole Hunter Biden New York Post laptop scandal involving many of the same actors, by the way, Clapper and Brennan and Comey and the whole clown show there. There's just been a lack of accountability for just way too long, and I genuinely hope that there's going to be something here. So I was very happy for what it's worth to see Jim Comey get indicted. I think we'll have to see. Well, we'll see where that goes, but it certainly seems like the prosecutors have a serious case to me. Mike, I want to get your thoughts now on another judicial related issue, which is what I like to refer to as the judicial insurrection. Because here we are less than 1 year into the first year of Donald Trump's second term, and the number of so-called nationwide injunctions, which, by the way, the Supreme Court kind of sort of put a stop to this, right, with the case back in late June, but lawyers are lawyers. They always find ways around what are otherwise pretty clear rulings. So to an extent, these have continued there. The number of so-called nationwide injunctions, I'm not entirely sure if it's already surpassed the first term number, but it's really, really close. At a bare minimum, it's really, really close to the number for the entire Trump term. And by the way, the first Trump term had more nationwide injunctions than the first 44 presidents combined. Okay, so, we're talking here about historically unprecedented conduct by lower court judges to try to stop this stuff. Now, Mike, I was filling in on radio this morning on a separate program, and I interviewed Congressman Brandon Gill of Texas, who we also work closely with at the Article 3 Project. Congressman Gill has filed articles of impeachment against Judge Boasberg in Washington, D.C. Impeachment is just one of the many tools at our disposal. I'd be curious for your thoughts on the case against Judge Boasberg in particular, but also just more generally, what more you would like to see happen from both Article 1, the Congress, and Article 2, the executive branch, when it comes to fighting back against this historically unprecedented judicial insurrection.
So for 4 years of President Trump's first term, he fought these hoaxes, this lawfare, this sabotage of his presidency, the sabotage of the will of American voters. He fought lawfare for 4 years while he was out of office because the Democrats feared he would be back in office. And Article 3 projects played a massive role in fighting back against that with 5,000 media hits, constant social media, constant opinion pieces to change the narrative, flip the script, and make this a political win for President Trump, turn lemons into lemonade after 4 indictments, tried to bankrupt him in fraud, to try to, with fraud charges, try to throw him off the ballot unconstitutionally in several states, tried to take off his head when Biden underfunded Trump's Secret Service, said he was the gravest threat to America, and Biden said to put a bullseye in Trump, and Trump almost got killed twice. President Trump's back in office. The American people gave President Trump an overwhelming electoral mandate. All 7 swing states, 312 electoral votes. The popular vote, he kept the House. He won a comfortable margin in the Senate, and he has a mandate to lead. And President Trump is doing exactly what he promised American voters he would do, and why he won re-election. President Trump promised he would secure our border. He would expel illegal aliens, particularly the worst terrorists of the Western Hemisphere like Tren de Aragua and MS-13. He'd cut waste, fraud, and abuse in government. And President Trump is doing the unthinkable in Washington. He's actually doing what he promised American voters he would do. He is exercising core Article 2 executive power as the commander-in-chief and as the chief executive officer. He is not stealing Congress's Article 1 legislative power. He is not stealing the Supreme Court's Article 3 judicial power. And what we see are these Democrats, plaintiffs and attorneys and other activists go into these Democrat judges and these Democrat hellholes like New York, D.C., Boston, Chicago, L.A., and they are getting these illegal, unconstitutional injunctions against the President of the United States and his team, trying to sabotage his electoral mandate. And the whole point of the game is to sabotage and delay and to run out the clock. And as we talked about already, these are lawless orders. These judges have a modest uh, but crucial role is to decide cases and controversies of the parties properly before the court with redressable claims. That's their Article 3 power. Nothing more, nothing less. They are judges in robes. They are not narcissistic superheroes in capes. Their job is to decide cases before them, not to fly around the country with their capes and save the American people from the president of the United States. And that's where these activist judges are acting illegally, unconstitutionally, and very dangerously. Now, again, President Trump is winning a record number of cases at the emergency docket of the Supreme Court. It's almost 90%. So it shows you that it's these activist Democrat judges who are being lawless, not the president of the United States. But it's this sabotage that's ongoing that will never end. And we saw this with Boasberg. Jeb Boasberg is this DC Obama judge who opened up his courtroom on a Saturday when it was not even his duty dockets that weekend. And he ordered the president of the United States, the commander in chief, to turn around military planes over the Gulf of America carrying the most vicious, dangerous terrorist in the Western Hemisphere, Trendy Aragua and MS-13. Fortunately, those planes did not turn around, but Boasberg exposed an ongoing military operation. We saw the security footprints in El Salvador with thousands of law enforcement intel agencies, police to accept these terrorists. Why would Boasberg think we had that same security footprint in America? Who the hell would have thought a federal judge would order the president to turn around military planes during a secret military operation that judge exposed? So yes, he should be impeached. This same Jeb Boasberg also freed from jail, overruled a federal magistrate judge and freed from jail a woman who made death threats against the president of the United States and then traveled to the White House from New York City. She got caught by the Secret Service and arrested. She was detained, and then Boasberg overruled the detainment order of the magistrate judge and freed this woman. This guy is a extremely dangerous, lawless partisan judge who needs to be impeached. I have not called for the impeachment of judges before because I think it's a very high standard. But I think the standard here is you have to see very lawless orders that are also very dangerous. And Boasberg definitely fits both of those. And that's why I commend those in the House of Representatives, including the new all-star from Texas, Brandon Gill, who is who's worked with the Article 3 project and called for Boasberg's impeachment. Look, I realize that it's going to be very hard to get him removed from the Senate, but I want Boasberg to go through the process for him to understand this is unacceptable what he's doing. And I want the other judges to see this. I want them to see Boasberg sitting through an impeachment hearing instead of issuing lawless and dangerous orders from the federal bench. So they understand that there's a deterrent here.
Absolutely. And keep your eye, for the listeners and viewers, keep your eye on Congressman Brandon Gill. I've known him personally for years. He is a sharp guy, a 31-year-old fighter for the good guys now in the U.S. House. Keep your eye very much on Congressman Gill. We'll definitely bring him on as a guest in the not-so-distant future here on the Josh Hammer Show. Mike, you've been very generous with your time. Before I let you go, I suppose one final question. I don't want to be accused of ignoring what is one of the newsier pieces of the news cycle now over the past 24 hours or so, which is that the House Oversight Committee released 20,000, give or take, new emails pertaining to the so-called Epstein files, and there are various people that are very upset about various things. My basic take on this, which was my basic take back in July when there were a lot of people, even on the right, who were really melting down over this at the time, my basic take is the same then as it is now, which is that everyone obviously wants justice for real victims, but I think if you ask the median American, Mike, what issue they care the most about, this would probably rank somewhere between like 40 and 50. And if you're trying to get Republicans more on board with focusing on the issues that really matter here to the economy, immigration, crime, et cetera, it seems just like something of a major distraction to me. I'm curious if you agree with that or if you have a slightly different take.
It is, and it's because Chuck Schumer got his ass handed to him on this government shutdown, and so the Democrats need a distraction because their base is so angry. So what do? They roll out more Epstein, right? What Jeffrey Epstein did to these young girls is horrifying. It's the worst behavior imaginable, and any person who rapes a child should be subjected to the most cruel, sadistic death penalty ever. And I think we should bring back the death penalty for child
Yes.
rapist,
Amen.
right? There's no question about that. Here's the problem with the Epstein case is you have these young women who do not want to testify. They have become adults now. They don't want to relive their trauma. They've signed non-disclosure agreements. Some of them have settled where they can't talk about this, and so it's very hard to prosecute cases when the victims do not want to talk. And I understand why they would not want to talk. I would encourage them to come forward if they want to talk, but if they don't want to, they just don't want to have their lives destroyed again. So you have to deal with the evidence you have to play by the grand jury rules. You can't just put out grand jury evidence where people cannot respond to it. That's a violation of federal law, as a court just recently ruled. Now they're trying to say that Trump was somehow involved with this. They're trying to smear President Trump again. Trump threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago when Trump found out that Epstein was a creep. There is zero evidence that Trump did anything inappropriate related to this Epstein mess. You'd not think that would have come out. The Democrats had to make up crimes against President Trump, make up hoaxes, impeachment hoaxes, Russian collusion hoax, make up crimes and hoaxes. You don't think they would have used this evidence that Trump was somehow involved with this Epstein mess if they had it? Of course they don't have it, right? And I would say this, these Democrats who suddenly care about child rape, Joe Biden imported 20 million illegal aliens into our country, including child rapists and murderers. Joe Biden lost over 300,000 migrant kids, many of whom are being trafficked into sex slavery. Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley Biden, has in her diary that Joe Biden took inappropriate showers with her as a child. And Joe Biden is the one who's on TV constantly sniffing and groping little kids in the most disgusting way imaginable. If these Democrat activists, these Democrat reporters actually cared about child rape, they would have looked into all of that, but they don't. They're trying to smear President Trump and to distract from their own failure because they got their asses kicked by Trump during the shutdown.
Very well said. Hard to disagree with a single word right there. Mike Davis, one final time, folks, is the president and founder of the Article 3 Project, where he is my esteemed colleague as well. You can check us out at article3project.org. Follow the Viceroy on X at MRDDMIA. Mike, God bless you. Thank you for all you do. And I look forward to seeing how combative you are on your next appearance on The Josh Hammer Show.
Thank you, Josh.
Well, in other news, the former king of cable news, now moonlighting as a late career podcaster, has done it yet again. Yes, Tucker Carlson on his show last night spent virtually the entirety of his hour 45-minute performance excoriating certain individuals like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro. What could those two individuals have in common? It's really an Agatha Christie mystery, isn't it? It really makes you wonder what's going on here. But look, Mark and Ben have major megaphones. They don't need me to defend them. I want to focus on something else that Tucker Carlson said over the course of this wild, wild episode. And it was this. He went after a man by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm going to tell you what Tucker said, and then we'll explain Dietrich Bonhoeffer's story, and you'll understand how insane and terrible this is. Tucker is talking about the dangers of calling people Nazis. And I actually agree with that. There is a massive, massive danger. In fact, for years and years, when the left would call folks on the right a bunch of goose-stepping Nazis, I was one of the loudest folks saying, shut up. You're wrong. These are good, patriotic American conservatives. The difference between then and now is that there are literal Nazis that people like Tucker are playing footsie with. Okay, back to Tucker's episode last night. Tucker Carlson, quote, because once you start calling people Nazis, we really have no choice but to start shooting them. To be Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to reach the end of reason or even Christianity. Bonhoeffer decided that Christianity's not even, he was a Lutheran pastor, Christianity's not enough. We have to kill the guy, meaning Hitler. I'm not judging Bonhoeffer, who was a great man in some ways, but that's inevitable once we decide that some people are Nazis. He's literally condemning Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran pastor, deeply involved in the Nazi resistance movement. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who famously gave a radio address on February 1st, 1933, just 2 days after the Nazis took power, warning about this cult around Hitler and the Nazis that was coming out. He helped found the Confessing Church, which was done in direct response to the Nazi push to nationalize and Aryanize Germany's Protestant churches at the time. Bonhoeffer did a ton over the years to try to smuggle Jews out of Germany. He was involved in all sorts of operations to try to covertly harm or assassinate Hitler. What Tucker is literally saying here is that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who was involved in the Nazi resistance, including efforts to covertly assassinate Hitler, he's saying that Bonhoeffer was acting in an unchristian manner. That's literally what he is saying right now. Now, my social media feed today is just blowing up with condemnation of this, which is a very good sign. That's a white pill, including very prominent Christians who know a thing or two about Christian theology, such as Eric Metaxas. Eric Metaxas was blowing a gasket on this, to his great credit. He's obviously correct to do so. This is utterly bat crap insane. But for present purposes, I would simply say this. There is such a troubling pattern now when it comes to Tucker, Candace Owens, and some of these actors. But Tucker really is the most troublesome of them all at this point there. So to Tucker Carlson, when you are bringing on multiple crackpot pseudo-historian guests to revisit and try to relitigate World War II, to try to make it out that America maybe was actually not on the right side, that perhaps we actually should have sided with the Nazis and not the communists. Maybe Hitler was actually the better ally than Stalin. When you do that, when you bring on Nick Fuentes, who literally self-describes as quote-unquote Team Hitler, says that Hitler was really effing cool, and you engage in like a chummy photo op with your hand around his shoulder, just smiling ear to ear with this well-known Holocaust-denying neo-Nazi. And then when you do things like say that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not a good Christian for trying to take out Hitler, and by the way, to state an obvious point, those of you who have actually read a history book, unlike Carlson, will probably know, it was not just the Jews who were the victims of the Nazi genocide. To be clear, the Jews were the first and foremost object of the Nazi genocide. They slaughtered all sorts of other individuals, by the way, including Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They executed him at Buchenwald concentration camp. In fact, the Nazis, who were deeply anti-religious in general, they were utterly amazed that Bonhoeffer maintained his faith until his final moments. His SS interrogators complained that he was, quote, too religious. Bonhoeffer's burning at Buchenwald, his final words, actually, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life." He's one of the most inspiring figures, frankly, of all World War II. I've heard Glenn Beck and others speak about him, and now Tucker is saying he's a lousy, lousy Christian. It really does make you wonder what side Tucker Carlson is on. This is not just about the Jews. Are you on Team America? Are you on Team Western Civilization? Literally, are you? Could you imagine what Dwight Eisenhower, who led those heroic men who stormed the beaches of Normandy to liberate the European continent from fascism, could you imagine what Dwight Eisenhower, how he would have reacted to a political commentator saying that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was unchristian? Are you kidding me? At some point, you lose the ability to say that you are on Team Western Civilization. And at some point, frankly, you lose the ability to say that you are not on Team Nazi rehabilitation. Because that looks exactly like, frankly, what this is. I'm Josh Hammer, and this has been The Josh Hammer Show.